scare you? Good, good. You may not have had coffee, but you're awake now. So I'll try again. Good morning and welcome to Westside Unitarian Universalist Church. My name, if you don't know me, is Ellen Greenwood. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am the worship associate for today's service. We welcome you if you are here with us in person, and we also welcome you if you are joining us virtually on YouTube, either right now in real time, or if you tune into this recording later on. We are very happy to have you with us this morning. We are a welcoming congregation that seeks to affirm each person who chooses to worship with us regardless. Basically, just regardless of who you are and how you identify spiritually or in any other way. I hope that each one of you who's here with us in person this morning will stay afterward for coffee and conversation. We especially welcome you to stay and let us get to know you if you are new. And if you are new to Westside, then I would also suggest that you take a quick look after the service at the materials that are over next to the window that will tell you possibly a little bit about Unitarian Universalism and Westside UU Church specifically. We're also, very happy this morning to have some of our members who've been with us for a long time that we don't see very often anymore. So welcome to all of you too. Before we get into our service, we do I want to direct your attention to the announcements that are in your order of service. I have been asked to especially point out the information about our retreat. Our fall retreat will be at a new place for us this year. It will be at Rock Island State Park, Friday, November 15th through Sunday, November 17th. Our retreats are always wonderful experiences. So I'm not registered yet, and I just hope that I can get a room. I don't know. But Craig was telling me just before the service that of the 15 rooms that are available for us that we have rented, there are 4 left. So we were talking about how many people that means per room, and we're not real sure what that means, but there are only 4 left. So get your reservations in if you are going to be able to join us. And then I want to quickly, if possible, that's not my specialty, but I want to point out the other announcement that's in a little box down at the bottom of your order of service. And those of you who are at home, these announcements should be scrolling on your screen as well. This coming Sunday, my husband, Dave, and I are leading a group. Saturday, sorry. Yeah, that's what I meant. Check me on any date or day that I give. Saturday, we are leading a walk over in the Forks of the River Wildlife Management Area to see the sunflowers. We're leaving very early. We're going to meet here at the church at 8 because I don't know if you've noticed, but it's really hot, and we don't want to die of the heat. But we have we've added a little bit to that event that's not really part of our auction offering, but I think we can make it work out. After we see the sunflowers, we're going to all go for lunch together there in South Knoxville, and then those who are interested are going to go with us to kind of pay a little visit, a field trip visit, to a business in South Knoxville called Knoxville Teal, which is a business that tries to reduce the use of plastic and all the proliferation of plastic that we live with by having things that you can refill. So we'll just go, you don't have to buy anything, but just to find out what they're all about. And then we're also going to go by the Sustainable Living Center, which David Bolt, a friend of Westside, operates, and Ann Harvey will be there to show us around the Sustainable Living Center a little. So we're making good use of our gasoline that we use to get to South Knoxville to see the sunflowers and see a few other things. And if you would like to join us and you're not already signed up, see me. If you want to join at any point in all of that various bit of activities, let me know and we'll try to figure out times and so forth. All right, any other announcements that we need to get out of the way? That's a good thing. Our service today is one I'm really, really looking forward to. It's a continuation of our What's Your Story series that we've been enjoying for the last few months. And today we're going to be hearing Annette Catlin, who is a longtime Westsider, and she's going to tell about her early childhood experiences in a Japanese prison camp. When Annette and I first talked about this, and I mentioned that she could tell her story, she said, well, that's not all my story. That was only the first few years of my life. But those are the ones we'll be, she has done a lot since that time. But today we'll hear about that. So, as I invite our Tibetan singing bowl to sing for us, I invite each of us to let the song of the bowl bring us wholly present into this time and this place so that we can come together as a community, leave behind all the other things running through our minds, to share and to learn as we listen to each other. I have asked Eileen Catlin, Annette's daughter, to light our chalice for us this morning and also our candles of care and joy. The words for our chalice lighting come from Adam Slate. We gather this morning as one community, a community united by common ideals: love, justice, diversity, freedom, mutual care, equity. Yet look around. Look at the faces of those around you. Each face represents an individual. Every one of us with our own story, needs, strengths, and faults. We light our chalice today, honoring our common connection and also the uniqueness that lives within each of us. So each Sunday we light candles for the world beyond this sanctuary, one for the bad and one for the good. And in keeping with the topic of today's service, our candle of concern is for all those individuals still currently suffering as the results of war. We hear stories like the one we're about to hear, and we say, never forget, don't let this happen again. But sadly, we know that thousands are suffering as we speak. The most obvious examples being in Gaza and in the Ukraine, and getting up this morning, I was hearing about dire conditions in the Sudan. It's a continuing thing, so let's hold all of the individuals affected in that way in our hearts. For joy, I'd like to celebrate the Appalachian Equality Chorus. This is a group formerly known as the Knoxville Gay Men's Chorus, and Dave and I got to hear them at the Bijou Friday night, and it was just a wonderful concert. It was beautiful, and it was a powerful experience. In the course of the concert, individuals from the chorus told their stories. They were all folks from across the East Tennessee LGBTQ community. And even when their stories were difficult, and most of them were at some point, they still celebrated a certain community and acceptance that they had found right here in East Tennessee, most of them primarily through that group, the chorus, but in other ways too. So it was just a very celebratory evening, and I love the work that chorus does. So, before Annette tells us about her experiences, let's join together and sing number 346 in our hymnals, Come Sing a Song with Me. No. We're on our own. Okay. No choir. You don't have to stand, but you need the mic.
No, I need the mic, I think. and I need to find my third outline, because every time I make an outline, I can't read it, so I have to do it again. I make it shorter, because this is a huge subject, and there's no way I can cover it in just 20 minutes, but I will try to tell you something about it. My mother and I were in a Japanese camp for 2.5 years we were in it from 1942 to about 1945. And we got back to the Netherlands in 1946 because it took us that long to get home. I will just use my own memories because, surprisingly, I have memories of that time, even when I was very small. I have a cousin my age who remembers nothing. But I remember all sorts of things, and of course I had all my mother's memories, which I listened to for about 10 years or so, longer. So I have those. And I was very lucky, my mother gave it to me, I think. I have this little book we found, and in this little book, it tells exactly what happened in the camp. And all my mother's memories and stories are in here. So it has been a big help to me. Because, of course, I had holes in this camp. You know, I think I remembered this, but I didn't know how I got there, and so on. So there were gaps. Okay. All right.
I can't hear you very well.
All right. I'll talk very loud. But first, before I do anything else, Ellen asked me to give a little bit of a background to our story. And but something else has come up. It just came up the other day. And it might have been around for a while, but I didn't know about it. God, Aline helped me to find it. The concentration camp was not a concentration camp. Don't think of it as a camp like you had here in America for the Japanese citizen. There's no comparison. It's not even a prisoner of war camp. They were death camps, all of them. And they were all over Southeast Asia. They were in China, they were in Korea, they were in Taiwan, they were on all the islands in Indonesia. So these were death camps. It was not the aim of the Japanese to keep any of us alive, any. There was actually an order to kill all prisoners September the 16th, 1945. A little bit too late because the bombs fell first. So the bombs actually saved our lives. Now, some of you might want to look this up on your map on your phone. And I will give you the name if you're interested in it afterwards. But there is you can look up the name of an intern camp. And if you look up that name, it's called the Kuching Camp. It was in Borneo. And if you look that up, then you will get most of the information that I will give you right now. Right? Okay, so here it goes. The Japanese had a policy of gradual extermination to kill all prisoners of war on September the 15th, 1945. This was their policy of gradual extermination if you had no longer any economic use, which was most women and children and old people. And in this particular case, they even tell you exactly how you were going to do it, how these Japanese people were going to do it. One former internee at this camp, at the Kuching camp, under Colonel Suka, wrote, "It has now been established beyond all doubt that Suka intended to dispose of all prisoners on September the 15th, 1945, in detailed order for the day. All people in captivity were placed in one of 4 categories and were to be liquidated in the following manner." Now, this camp was in Borneo, Indonesia. It was a big camp. And the categories were, 1, women, children, and nuns, because there were nuns there, to be given poisoned rice. 2, internee men and Catholic fathers to be shot and burned. 3, 500 British, American, Dutch, and Australian prisoners of wars to be marched to the mountains to be shot and burned. And 4, the sick and the weak left in Ling Tong main camp, that was the main camp, to be bayoneted and the entire camp destroyed by fire. Those were the instructions to the Japanese in all the camps, not just in Borneo. This happened everywhere. And we only found this information after the war. And we only found it because Aline found it in declassified information, right? In the Veldbeats. She's been looking for information. So I found this very upsetting, actually, when I read it. I was really upset. I thought, my God, it was even worse than I thought. Because I've always called our camp a death camp. Ellen knows that, because I always said it was a death camp. Because there was no way we could survive. The food was 600 calories a day. There was no nutrition at all. I'll tell you about the diet later. There's really no diet, actually. But anyway, the women had to work hard labor. They worked all day long, got up before dawn, worked till 1 o'clock. Then they had 2-hour rest, and then they had to go work. They all had jobs. Everybody had a job. And even the children had jobs. When people got sick, and everybody got sick, in the end, they died 15 a day. They died of such things as, well, of course, dysentery, all kinds of dysentery. They died of malaria, beriberi. You can name all the diseases, tropical diseases you can think of. And there were no medicines. Even though medicines were available on Java in this case, we were on Java. It wasn't like there was no medicine. It was there. They were not given to us. And the food, we didn't get any food. Well, Java is a rich island. There's a lot of food on Java. So there was no reason for us not to get some more fruit and vegetables. And so actually people were just sitting there, working really hard, getting sick and dying. And to me, that was the end. And to me, that was a death camp. There was no attempt made to keep us alive. And I don't know what you call that. Well, that is anyway, I wanted to tell you that. That was my little add-on, because I just found out about it. It made me really mad. So, to go on. I was asked to give some background. For some of you, maybe you're not so familiar with the islands and the tropics. I have a little map here. I might show you that in a second. But we were Dutch, and some of you will say, well, why were you there? We were Dutch colonials. And the Netherlands has been connected with Indonesia for 300 years. They have been there for 300 years or longer. Because you might remember the spice trade from your history lessons. So these were big sailing ships that already started going late 1500, 1600. The Dutch had a huge fleet, and they were all over the oceans. And then the Portuguese were doing the same thing, of course. And then English came actually a little bit later, and the French, and of course the Spanish. So I think those were the European nations seeking spices. And if you had spices on your ship and you made it back to the Netherlands, you made a fortune, even when your ship was not fully filled, because Europe was dying for spices. So it was a very profitable trade. So then we were in Indonesia for 300 years. So it is really almost part of the Dutch history. And young men would go to Indonesia, work there, go back to Holland, go back to Indonesia, maybe marry there, maybe stay there, or come back to the Netherlands to retire. But it was called the Dutch East Indies. So probably was not good to be colonials. I'm not going to go in depth. It's all right, it's another topic. But that's why we were there. My father went there when he was 21. He was the principal of a school, an elementary school in Borneo, Pontianak. Now, all these names have changed, but they're still using the name Pontianak. It was another big city at the time. He went in 1929 to Indonesia, to Borneo, and he was there for 10 years. And after that, he had been offered a job in Yogyakarta, which is on Java. And on Yogyakarta, they had a teachers' college for Indonesian people. Because the Dutch people, when they had to study high school and university, they would go back to the Netherlands to study. But the Indonesians didn't have anything. So there were several colleges for Indonesian students. Of course, you had to be fluent in a couple of their languages, which my father was at that time. But it never happened because he got a job around 1940. And you know what happened in 1940? It was the beginning of the war there in Europe. And the Dutch declared war together with the Americans and all that. And then my father was drafted into the Navy. And so we did go to Java. We did go to Surabaya. I think my mother rented a house, and he was in the Navy, come home now and then. And then, no. Well, in those days, so that was at the very beginning of the outbreak of the war. Now you know what the Dutch were doing there, right? Now, if you want to, I just want to show you on the map, if you can see it. Yeah, it's not that exciting. These are the islands. I'll show you the islands. The big one on the top, where is it? That one. Yeah. That one over there is Borneo. Cannot sing it. That one over there is Borneo. And my father was here in Pontianak.
You're going to do it?
You talking to the mic. And I'll
Okay.
point.
You point, okay. Pontianak was there. And so this is the island of Java. It's a very long island and up today very overpopulated. And we went I was still not yet there, Borneo, they went to Java. From there they went to Surabaya. Where is it?
Surabaya's right.
It's way at the end here. So that's where we settled, in Surabaya. And then later, while I'm at it, we went from Surabaya to Semarang. That's where the camp was. The name of the camp was Halmahera. So then we went over there, and that's basically it. This is Borneo, Java, Sumatra. You might remember Sumatra from the tsunami a few years ago. Was at the point. So that, if you put those islands next to each other, they are the width of the United States. You know, this way. That's it. You can put that. You see, it was very difficult to get a proper map, because how did it look? Because I wanted a map of Southeast Asia, but Indonesia at the bottom, I couldn't find it. We have a little bitty map, which you might see. I think. We have a little bitty map, and it is mainly everything that is red. All the red within this line was Japanese occupied land, all of it. And the war with Japan, you can pass this around if you like. The war with Japan We went to war much later than the Japanese. The Japanese already invaded Manchuria in 1931. So they were already ready to fight. But then again, they invaded in 1937. That was the real invasion of China. And at that time, they took the city of Nanking, which was the nationalist capital. And I don't know if you know the history of Nanking, but it was awful. It was a terrible occupation. 300,000 civilians were killed in the most awful way. And then from there, they took only parts of China and moved down the coastline toward the islands, toward Indonesia. What can I tell you next? The Japanese, because they started the wars so early, in 1931 already, they built up a huge fleet, as you all know, and they needed for that fleet and for the airplanes, they needed oil. So oil was the big factor in here. So when Franklin Roosevelt decided to have an oil embargo on the Japanese, that was not a good thing. But another thing that happened, and I wasn't really aware of that either, the Dutch had a huge contract with Japan for oil, because Java and Borneo, they're full of resources, and there's a lot of oil on Java. And the Dutch owned, but they had control of that oil, so they had a big contract with Japan. And when the Dutch joined the Allies, they broke the contract. So the Japanese were probably pretty angry at the Dutch for breaking that contract. So because they broke the contract of the oil embargo, things became pretty desperate for the Japanese. And it might have played a role in the attack on Pearl Harbor, because the Japanese were very afraid that the fleet, the American fleet, would try to get quickly to the islands of Java to protect the oil for the Allies. This is what the Japanese were afraid of. So one theory is that that's one of the reasons they attacked faster than they had planned, to get rid of that, destroy the fleet. And so, I don't know if that's, well, that is true, but that was a factor. After that, at the attack of Pearl Harbor, just before it, December 7th, American time, December the 8th, Japanese time, they declared war on America, Britain, and, surprise, the Netherlands. You have to remember that Netherlands is very small. Else should know that. But, and so I guess we were enemies then. And on the islands, Indonesia and the Americans and Australians and Britain, they did want to hold that fleet back if possible, but they didn't have enough ships. So they formed their own fleet, a little fleet. It was called the ABDA fleet, American, Britain, Dutch, and Australia. So the Dutch only had 3 torpedo boats. It was pathetic. 3 torpedo boats. And the Americans had some boats, but all the equipment was defective. So half of the torpedoes didn't take off. I don't know about the Australians and the British, but anyway, they took off, and that was called the Battle of the Java Sea. It lasted 2 weeks. And I think 4 ships torpedo ships were sunk. And I don't know the number of men that drowned, many. And my father was in that battle. And I only found out about my father being in that battle in a very strange way. That I went to see some lawyers here in Knoxville. And it came up that my father was in that part of the world, and he was in that battle. And they got so excited, you know. Oh, really? Well, let's look up his name. Give us a... They looked up his name. And now I know the name of the boat he was on, because he was listed on that boat. The Kortenaars, the Dutch word. And so it was sort of strange, you know, to get information here in the United States many, many, many years later. And so that's how I found out about that battle, and I found out which ship he was on, and that ship was torpedoed, and he was one of 150 people that was able to survive that, because there were some ships that were picking up survivors. So after that, the battle was over. They lost it, of course. It was a complete loss. And my father just went home, you know, so he went home. There was nothing else to do. But the battle did have an advantage for Australia, because it gave Australia about 2 weeks to get ready for the coming of the Japanese, because the Japanese were going to Australia eventually. And my father went home, and that's all I'm going to tell you about the background. So I'll just go back to Java, Surabaya. And in Surabaya, everything was like calm. All the banks closed. People had no money, unless you have money, you know, sitting in your safe at home. But my mother was selling cashew fudge to all the rich women to make some money. And she had a couple of babus, we called them, maids. Is that me? That's me. Just grab it. And the babus did not hate us. They apparently liked us. So my mother said, well, I'm sorry, I can't keep you any longer. I don't have the money to pay you. And they said, well, how much money do you have? What can you give us? So she said, well, maybe 50 cents a day. That's Dutch cents. And they said, oh, that's enough. And they went to the local bazaar, yes, that's called bazaar, and they were able to feed all of us on 50 cents a day, you know, and till the war, till the camp really started. So there was a lull, and my father came there in the lull, and all the men did not really expect what was going to happen. They thought the Japanese would come in. They thought the Japanese would take over all the administrative functions, and that all the rest of the people would just go back to work. That's what they were expecting. And it was, of course, totally wrong, because it didn't happen. So all the men had to register in Surabaya. So after lunch one day, my father said, okay, well, I'll be back soon, I'm going to register. Thinking you have to go there and fill out some papers, right? Well, they kept him. They kept all the men. They kept about 3,000 men. Didn't let him go. And of course, they had nothing with them. They just walked out of the houses, you know, to go register. So my mother, she packed a little bundle of things, like toothpaste or whatever, and had to give him some things with him. And she went on her bicycle. We did everything on her bicycle. On her bicycle, she went down to where that place was, and there was a long line of Japanese soldiers on both sides with bayonets, but they obviously hadn't gotten their orders yet. So she was able to pedal right past all of them to where the area was where the men were held. But she was not able to see my father, but she was able to give this little bit that she had to somebody to give to him. And then she went back home, and about 2 days later, all the men were put on trains and taken away. So we never saw him again, or she never saw him again. That lunch was the last time. We don't know exactly what happened to him. We do know that he died at the Burma Railroad in 1943. But in between, Aline has been doing some research. She does not think he went straight there. So I'll leave that up to her. So now it was all women waiting. And then we got an order. And this, again, is not the same in all the camps. In some camps, they had a week. Some camps, it was, that time. But we got a 24-hour order to be ready to go. And all we were allowed was a little suitcase to take with us and nothing else. And so my mother had to really rush, because what do you take in 24 hours when you don't know where you're going and you have a small child? What would you take? And so she managed to bury some small silver things we had in front of the house in some kind of a cookie jar. And strangely enough, it was never found. And we did get that back after the war. But I don't know what she packed. Knowing my mother, I imagine she packed coffee. Because she said coffee is what got her through the camp. No, seriously, without coffee, she wouldn't have made it. So I imagine that's what she, I don't know what she packed. But nobody knew what to pack, so everybody probably packed the wrong things. Now, later, other people came in. People kept coming into these camps, and they already knew the situation. So later, those people that came in brought food, which is what you should have brought. And so they were better off. Or medicines, they might have brought medicines. So we went on a train, which was completely, they had boarded up, dark. You couldn't see out. And with the train, we went, I didn't know where we were going to go, but now, and then for years, I didn't know where we went. But I know the camp was Halmahera. And it wasn't until I met Jette's mother, who was in a camp next to it, and a bit older than I was. And she says, oh yeah, I know where that was. So it was here that I discovered that the camp was part of Samarang. I never knew that. So Samarang, we pointed it out, this is city near the coast. And this place where we ended up was an abandoned piece of town where railroad workers used to live. They were all little houses. There's like one living room, and then the Indonesians usually had their kitchens in the back, and then they had some other things, but it's mainly one living room. And in those little houses, we ended up sleeping with 12 people in the same small room, and wherever you could find a place. But when we got to Halmahera, it wasn't like they assigned you a house. You had to go look for a place. You had to go walk around and see if somebody there were already some people there, was willing to take you in, or had room for you. So you didn't immediately go there to your house. You had to look for it. And of course, we had no mattress, we had no blankets, we had nothing. And people just slept on the floor, I suppose. I don't remember that, actually. But I tell you something funny about these houses. I remember places where I slept. Now, you have to remember, I was small, 2.5 to 5, I believe, something like that. And I remember where I slept. And I slept, my first experience, I slept on a trunk, on top of a trunk. And my mother had put a netting around the trunk in Indonesia for the bugs, And I was sleeping on the trunk, and I rolled over and got stuck in the netting. I rolled over off the trunk in the netting. I was small, I remember. A panic, I remember. It's the worst pain moment in my life, right? So that was the first place. And then later I remember sleeping next to a wall, a half wall, and I was sleeping on the floor there. And then I remember another time, all of us were sleeping in the same room, or 12 or so, jam-packed in one room. And there was one more time, Well, there were 4 times that I remember sleeping in different places, but I never knew why. And I said, that's what my memory, you know, I didn't understand till I got the book. And now I know, because the Japanese would come around every 2 months or so, maybe 4 months, I don't know. They would come in big trucks. There's a lot of soldiers in it. They would get everybody out of their house. We had to get outside. And then they would go in the houses and check everything and see if there was something we were not supposed to have, like maybe money that was buried or whatever. And then they would take that, and they would punish the person if it was the wrong thing. And then they would go away, and then all the women had to grab their stuff, and they had to go find a new house. So that was how we got 4 houses. We moved 4 times. We moved 4 times. That's why I slept 4 different places. It's kind of interesting to find that out. So that's what they did. It was a tactic, of course, because if you move all the time and you don't have your own place, you also don't get to know the people. You don't have a bond. Unless for the little family groups, they stay together as a family. But if you didn't have a family, it was hard to have a bond if you didn't stay in the same house for a long time, you know. And I think that was the purpose of making us move. Now, let me see where I am on my outline, please. Where am I, Aline? Help me a minute. The outline, the camp. So now we're in the camp. All right, in the camp, the song that we just sang, we were not allowed to sing. That's why I asked Alan to sing that song. Because in our camp, you were not allowed to sing. And you also were not allowed to learn. And you also were not allowed to have education. And any teenager that was there who might still have a book from school, they had to give it to the Japanese. They were not allowed to learn. You could not learn your small children the letters. So women would draw the letters in the mud. And then if a guard came by, they would quickly erase it. So all these children, actually, all those years, with no education, no toys, nothing. All they did was work. Even the children had to work. And one of the things they had to do for work was, started at the very beginning, the Japanese wanted us to build a vegetable garden. For them, of course. But anyway, we had to build it. The women had to build it. And so the earth was very hard. So it was, and they didn't have proper tools. That's another thing. So they had to dig up all that earth. That was their job, by the way, starting early in the morning and doing that most of the day. Dig up that earth. And the children had to take the lumps, and they had to try to make the lumps fine. And, you know, put it on the earth. Eventually, they did get a vegetable garden going, but it was for the Japanese. It was always for the Japanese. It wasn't for us. The Red Cross sent sent us packages with food. Everybody was very excited. American Red Cross. Well, they put all the food on a big table in one of the rooms, and we were allowed to walk around it and look at it. But we never got any of it. So, Halmahera, my camp, was one of the worst camps, I think, at the time, because the leadership in Halmahera, there were Dutch women. They collaborated with the Japanese. They were living with the Japanese. And of course, they didn't do anything for the inmates in that camp. So we had basically no leadership. So that's what the women did. They worked all day long in the burning sun. You were not allowed to sit down, ever. You have to do everything standing up, even though you could do some things sitting down, but you weren't allowed to do that. As far as the food goes, It was like this. In the morning, we got was it cornstarch? In the morning, there were big things of cornstarch with water. And I think they had a little bit of, my mother had a little bit of sugar. And so in the morning, our breakfast was cornstarch pudding. And then my mother put a little bit of sugar on it. And I'm telling you, that was my favorite food. And I can recommend it. It's really good. So if you want to try it, if there's nothing in the house, remember cornstarch. It's not just for the wall. You can also eat it. And then we were allowed 1 cup of flour and no yeast, but flour. And we were allowed at lunchtime, it was soup, watery soup with some greens in it. And I guess you could eat your rice with soup. So we had 1 cup of rice with soup. And that was it. And then in the evening, again, a repetition of the same style of food. And as far as the soup is concerned, there was no meat in it, except one time. This poor dog wandered into the camp. And you know what happened to the dog. And so that day, we had soup with dog and soup without dog. And you'll be surprised how many people refused to eat that, drink or take that soup with dog. They refused. But my mother didn't. She was very practical. She thought any piece of protein is better than no protein. So that was pretty much the diet. I can't think of anything else. It was 600 calories a day. It started off better in the beginning. In the beginning, there was still some fruit. There was still some eggs occasionally, stuff like that. But that all disappeared. And in the end, it was 600 calories a day. And I'm not making that up. That's a fact. That's what they found. And so everybody got very thin, as you can imagine. And if you have no nutrition and you don't get enough to eat, you get sick. And you have to work in the burning sun. And you can imagine what happened to many of these women. They died. There was one other thing that was interesting. In the beginning of the camp, a lot of children died very quickly. They died within a day. So in the afternoon, they were still fine. Toward the evening, they became listless. And then at night, the next day, they were dead. And they died of lack of sugar, for having no sugar in their diet. It was, like a diabetic. It was acetone or ketosis, whatever you call it. When you have so low, your sugar goes so low, you go into a coma. And so after that was more in the beginning. After that, and I'm not sure about this, but after that, I think we got some sugar from the Japanese, because my mother always had a little bit of sugar. So I think they must have started to do that to keep these people from dying. The first child that died, the first person that died was a 5-year-old boy, and he died of this. And his mother was allowed to go with him outside the camp and, bury him somewhere. But then after that, whenever anybody died, they just were taken outside the camp and nobody could go with them. So they don't know where they were buried. So that gives you an idea about the diet. In this book, it's kind of funny. She describes how very excited they got because one time there were a bunch of birds flying over the camp. Well, you know what they were trying to do with the birds. Everybody was trying to catch a bird, right? And my mother had an incident. This is a story in itself. People were catching frogs. And they had a doctor who knew how to kill the frogs, but that's what they were doing, catching frogs. They also ate the, I don't know what it's called in English, maden, whatever, from the trash. The little white worms, the little fat one? Maggots. Okay, you collect those, and you can fry those. It's pure protein. So that gives you some of the ideas of what the people did try to do to help themselves. And sometimes you had a child or somebody who knew how to get out of the camp. you know, because some of these people were from that area. But the Japanese, and he was caught, by the way, on his way home. He was trying to get out of the camp. He got out of the camp, and then he would get some food, you know, to bring back into the camp to his family. And he was caught. I think he was 8 years old. And the Japanese never punished children. Children were never punished by the Japanese. Instead, they punished the parents. And so this is a story. This mother was punished by having to sit on her knees, but straight up, arms out, and they made sure all the kids were there. There were 3 children, so they could watch. And every time she collapsed, they would beat her. So it was very traumatic for the children. And that's the sort of thing the Japanese did for punishment with the children, or different punishments. I could go on, but I won't. So I talked about the illnesses. So I'll tell you about some other things which stand out in our mind. Besides the vegetable garden, that was built eventually. You know, we were there for 2.5, 3 years sometimes. So we were there a long time to build. They've also got a pigsty and a pig. A big fat pig, and everybody said, there you go, maybe we'll get some pork. And so I remember this very well, the pigsty down. I was up here, the road was up here, and there was the pigsty. Well, my mother, I've already told you, a lot of people were dying. So she was walking around the vegetable garden trying to comfort a young woman who had just lost her mother. And she was trying to talk to this girl. And they were reported as stealing vegetables. You know, the worst crime, of course. And they didn't steal vegetables, but they were reported. So they were both very much beaten up, kicked. That was another thing. Japanese people they like to kick you in the shins and in the back, wherever. So they were beaten up quite a bit. And then the punishment was they had to be tied to that pigsty, that's why I remember it so well, and be there all day. She was gone to early evening, so it was all day sitting there without food or water in the tropical sun. Remember, it's a tropical sun. And that was the punishment. And I think they did it with other people too. But I remember this one. So that was the pigsty incident. The other incident that I remember, no, I don't remember this actually. I heard this from my mother. The other incident had to do with comfort women. Are you all familiar with that? Everybody? Eva? Just checking, you know, their history. So the comfort women. So the Japanese would warn the women that they were coming in, but they were looking for girls 14 years old. And so the mothers had to get their 14-year-old daughters ready to be taken by the Japanese as comfort women. So, but the mothers went in panic, and they did everything they could to make these girls as ugly as possible, you know, bows, make them look young, a bow in her hair, short skirts, you know, everything you can do, make them look dirty, unattractive. Because here it was, of course, it was a good thing if you were not going to be chosen. So they would take these girls. So the first time that happened in Halmahera, 3 women spoke up, and they told the Japanese, that's not right, you're not supposed to do that, blah, 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 you know. Well, they didn't listen, of course. And these women, I remember my mother telling me, she said there was a discussion, talking to the Japanese, and she wanted to join these women, because of course she agreed with the women. And she said, you know, I looked down and there you were, right next to me. You know, about probably 3 years old, 4 years old, I don't know. And so she didn't join them. But those women were put in a house. They called it, what did they call it? The dark house. They called it the dark house. They were put in a house, and the house was completely covered with, all the windows were covered with wood or whatever. So there was no light in that house, no electricity, no toilet. And they were put there And they were there for a year in that house. And every now and then, the Japanese would go in and have some fun, whatever they did. But in this book, see, my mother's story is when they went in. And this book, she talks about them coming out a year later. And at that time, they came out, and they couldn't see the light. They couldn't see in the light anymore because they had been so used to being in the absolute dark. And so they immediately had to be taken someplace so they could recuperate. But of the 3 women, one died almost immediately, and the second one died not shortly after. So only one survived. But I don't know anything about her, I don't know how she survived, but there's one that didn't die. That was the dark house. Everybody is scared stiff of the dark house, to be put in the dark house. You can't imagine anything worse. It's time. Well, I'll stop. I'm ready to stop. Oh, tie it up. Okay, that's easy. What? Oh. Actually, I'm pretty much finished. I wasn't going to tell you about how we left because it would take too much time. Okay, the Japanese lost the war, the bombs were dropped. The moment the bombs were dropped, it was over. The Japanese sort of collapsed. The guards walked around like they didn't know what they were doing. The gates were opened, but we could go home, because we had no transportation, for one, unless somebody came and got us. And at that time, the Indonesians had gone into a full-time rebellion against the Dutch colonials. So they were very busy killing Dutch people. So it wasn't very safe to leave the camp. So we had to wait. And we finally, we were transported in a train, again, all dark. And this time, it's kind of funny, guess who was our protector? The Japanese. Now we were being protected by the Japanese. And so we went back to Surabaya, had to live in with some people for a while, and then there were we left on trucks, big army trucks, all closed up. But now we were protected by the Gurkhas. Are you familiar with the Gurkhas? You should be, because they fight for the American army. They fought in Afghanistan for you. You don't, yeah. The Gurkhas is a huge volunteer army. They work for England. They were part of the British Army. They were always used to put down rebellions in India. And they are, well, yeah. They were from Nepal. They're all from Nepal. And they're fierce fighters. They're some of the best fighters. And today they're still part of the British Army, or it's no longer British, whatever, British Army. And they fight for the American Army. But they're not connected with the American Army. So they have fought in Afghanistan and all these places. So, but we don't know about them. Anyway, they came out because the Americans by this time left that part of the world. They went home. And we were suddenly under the oversight of the British, and therefore the Gurkhas. So the Gurkhas protected us, managed to get us out. Not all of the trucks made it. Some of them were attacked. And then we got to the coast, and then we got on some boats and went to Singapore, got a military transport, and eventually made it back to the Netherlands in 1946. And that's the end of the story. So how far over am I? I told you. Am I okay? All right. We'll put this all together.
No, you're wonderful. That was... That's an amazing story, and I hated to have to cut Annette off. We did want to have a little bit of time for questions or comments. It's past noon, and I know that we're running late. we could take just I guess, a couple of short comments, I suppose.
Maybe I say something. If any of you
No,
have...
let me get you my. Oh.
Does it work?
Try it.
Okay. All right, I just wanted to give you the name of this this camp, and it's on your it's on your phone, so you can look. Huh?
We can leave it, to put on the website.
Oh, okay. Alina's going to put it on the website, and then you can look it up and you can see what I was talking about. And there are also lots of comments with it, and then it puts you right into some of these things. All right? Oh, it's Dutch.
It's in Dutch.
Unless you can read Dutch.
I've tried to find an English translation.
Yeah, we can't find an English translation. Yeah.
But the title means half dead.
Yeah,
The ti-
Stenton guy, Mati, is the name of a guard. And when he hit you, you were half dead
yeah. So the title means half dead, right?
when he hit you, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments? It's kind of an overwhelming story. Wait just a minute. Well, wait. I'm not being very efficient with that.
It's okay.
That's why they had that Dr. Ishii. That's why we had Dr. Deaths in Japan.
Right,
And that's where...
right. He was in POW camp. He was in the Bataan Death March in the Philippines, from the Philippines. And I was interested in the book to kind of get an idea of conditions he may have been in, because I'm sure they were similar, maybe worse, since they were Navy officers.
Annette,
There's a very good website I can give you to that is,
Aline, talk so she can hear you.
there's a website, it's called mansell.com. It's MANSELL.com, and it's a group of men, POWs, that have gathered as much information as they can about the Burma-Siam Railroad, Bataan Death March, and it's information from all kinds of countries, and they kind of put it all on that website, and you can find tons of stuff there.
I was just reading about it, actually, and it was saying that in the Philippines, out of the 27,000 American prisoner of wars, half of them died, 40%, which was much higher than any prisoner of war in Germany. In Germany, in the camps, there might have been one per camp.
Also on that website, you can find the original source document of the Japanese order to kill all prisoners of war. Mansell.com. It's mainly, I mean, it's a kind of a fragmented kind of a website, but it has great information put up by POWs. And then the Australians have done a ton of work on preserving information about what happened, more so than any other country, really. So if you go to their war memorial, you'll find a lot of information there, too.
okay, anything else? All right. Well, I know that I, for one, am just extremely grateful for Annette sharing the first few years of her life with us. You know, it's amazing what stories we might have in this room. We are all we have so many different sides to us and so many different stories. So thank you all for being such a wonderful community this morning and for listening as we have heard Annette's story. Just right quick, I do need to point out that if you would like to contribute to Westside in some way monetarily, rather than just with all the wonderful service that you may give this church. We are doing that now either online or with our QR code at the back, or there is also a box you can put real money or a check in there if you'd like. And our Share the Plate partner, this is the last Sunday that Knox Pride will be our Share the Plate partner. And we have been collecting items for their food pantry, and I'm sure, I don't know exactly where that stands as we're coming to the end of the quarter, but if you have some things you would like to bring, I'm sure we can still get them there. So, as we close, let's stand, and if you would like to join hands, we would encourage you to do that. And let's remember that as we leave here today, we will extinguish our chalice, but we will not extinguish the warmth of community and the fire of commitment that we have in our hearts. We will take these with us as we go through the week. Go in peace.